Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a look at something that honestly hums quietly in the background of just about every choice we make. I'm talking about the daily grind. The stress, the motivation dips, and that constant struggle with self-worth. It is so easy to be our own worst critics when we're just trying to get through the day, right? Maybe you're rushing to get the kids to school, or trying to beat traffic for work, and suddenly you're beating yourself up over a tiny mistake. Well, today we are unpacking the psychology behind why we do this, and more importantly, we're going to talk about how to build a really solid foundation of unconditional self-worth. So let's jump right in.
First things first, I want you to pause for a second and really ask yourself a pretty tough question. Is your self-worth tied to outside factors? Think about your normal, everyday life. Do you ever get that sinking feeling that you're somehow a quote-unquote bad person if you don't land that big promotion at work? Or maybe you only feel truly good about yourself if the scale hits a very specific number in the morning. Research actually shows us that when we tie our self-esteem to these external metrics, we end up making choices just to protect that super fragile sense of worth. We might even avoid hard things altogether just so we don't fail, which basically means we're handing over control of how we want to live our lives.
And man, this creates a massive psychological trap. When our worth is tied up in these outside factors, a major shift happens in our brains. Instead of genuinely striving to meet our goals, we spend our days just desperately trying to avoid feeling bad about ourselves. Our main goal isn't growth anymore. It's just self-protection. Think about it. If we hit even a minor speed bump, like a critical email from a boss, we're suddenly way more likely to just give up, lose our motivation, or make a bunch of excuses just to soothe our bruised ego. Basically, we stop playing to win, and we start playing simply not to lose. This fear of failure shows up in a really relatable way in our daily lives through something called self-handicapping. When we aren't totally sure we can succeed at something, we will often subconsciously sabotage our own performance. Why in the world would we do that? Well, because it gives us a handy excuse for failing that doesn't threaten our core abilities. Haven't you ever suddenly felt the urge to deep clean your entire kitchen the night before a huge project is due? Or maybe blasted really distracting music while trying to focus on something tough? Subconsciously, you are setting up a scenario where if things go wrong, you can blame the loud music or the lack of time rather than yourself. It's a defense mechanism, plain and simple. Now we have to validate that these defense mechanisms exist for a very real reason. Staking our self-worth on outcomes creates actual vulnerabilities. For example, research highlights that underrepresented students, like women in engineering programs, are especially susceptible to massive drops in self-esteem from ordinary events, like getting a worse-than-expected grade. When you feel like you have to stake your entire worth on your academic or professional competence, the risk of failing often outweighs the opportunity to learn. It can literally cause people to completely drop their major or lash out at instructors just to protect their feelings. That is a really heavy burden to carry around every single day.
So how do we actually break free from this cycle? Well, we have to look at our fundamental human needs through what psychologists call self-determination theory. This theory outlines the psychological drivers beneath the surface, starting with our innate need for autonomy. Now, autonomy isn't just about being fiercely independent. In our daily lives, it's the ability to make your own choices and truly feel like you are the author of your own life. When we're endlessly chasing external validation, we completely lose that autonomy. We aren't doing things because we actually value them, we're doing them because we feel forced to, just to keep our fragile self-esteem intact.
The second big driver in this theory is competence. Naturally, we all want to feel effective and capable in our daily pursuits. You want to feel good at your job or good at a hobby you enjoy. But, as we've just seen, this totally natural desire becomes a dangerous trap if we attach our entire sense of self-worth to it. Competence is supposed to be about the joy of mastering a skill. It should be about engaging with the world, not this desperate, stressful requirement you have to meet every day just to prove you have a right to exist and feel good about yourself.
The third and final basic need here is relatedness, that deep human need to feel connected, cared for, and close to other people. I actually want to share a genuinely fascinating study here to ground this. Researchers looked into why people usually experience a huge boost in well-being on the weekends. And it turns out it's not just because we aren't at work. People feel better on weekends specifically because their needs for autonomy, finally choosing what they want to do, and relatedness, spending time with family or friends, are finally being met. Our daily work routines so often starve us of these incredibly basic, fundamental needs.
So a big question is, how do we start meeting these needs without making them a daily test of our worth? Back in the mid-20th century, a psychologist named Carl Rogers developed this brilliant concept called unconditional positive regard. Basically, it means caring for someone and giving them full permission to have their own feelings and experiences completely without judgment. Therapists use this all the time to create a safe space for clients. But here's the real secret. We need to start applying this non-judgmental stance to ourselves. Imagine treating yourself with unconditional positive regard every single day, just accepting your feelings and your slip-ups without immediately labeling yourself a failure.
Practicing this unconditional positive regard actually helps us move toward what Rogers called being a fully functioning person. And a huge part of that is something called existential living. Basically, this means trusting your own feelings and gut reactions, knowing that the decisions you make are valid. It's about embracing creativity and taking a few risks, rather than playing it safe all the time just because you're terrified of failing. Crucially, it means living for the moment. It's about fully appreciating the present over coffee in the morning instead of agonizing over past mistakes or stressing about future judgments. It really is just a much calmer, more grounded way to navigate your day.
Let's ground this with a real-world example from our sources. Take Rachel. Rachel works so incredibly hard that she has virtually zero time for relaxation or fun. By completely ignoring her need to just unwind, she is essentially using work as a metric to prove her worth to the world. In her mind, if she's always busy, she's always valuable. But this lack of balance actually reinforces low self-esteem in the long run, and it makes her highly vulnerable to stress and depression. She is literally starving her basic needs for autonomy and relatedness, all just to maintain a very fragile sense of competence.
All right, so how do we practically fix this in our own daily lives? Well, we can borrow a highly effective framework from cognitive behavioral therapy, and it starts really simply, by keeping an activity diary. If you struggle with low self-esteem, you might actually be denying yourself fun, satisfying activities because you feel like you haven't earned them yet, or maybe because you're too busy trying to prove yourself, kind of like Rachel. By tracking what you do hour by hour, you can clearly see exactly where your energy is going. You can then use that actual data to consciously decide what you want to change, which helps you strike a much healthier balance between work, life, and relaxation.
Now, as you track these activities, you're also supposed to rate your sense of achievement. But here is exactly where we often trip ourselves up. Take Tim, for example. Tim was struggling with extreme anxiety and shame over his finances, to the point where he put off going to the bank for months. When he finally forced himself to go, he rated his achievement as a measly 3 out of 10. His reasoning? He said, well, most people go to the bank without a second thought. Tim completely ignored his own personal circumstances and the massive mental courage it took for him to face his fear. We do this to ourselves all the time, don't we? We failed to give ourselves proper credit for the unseen, heavy mental effort required to complete what look like easy daily tasks.
I really want to remind you that you absolutely deserve credit for your modest everyday triumphs. Did you cook a healthy meal today? Did you check in on a friend, act as a caregiver, or simply manage to push through your daily anxiety just to get out the front door? Those are real positive achievements. When you're dealing with low motivation or a lot of stress, these activities require a ton of effort. Normalizing the struggle is key. You don't have to cure disease or become a CEO to have inherent worth. Your everyday survival and the care you give to yourself and others is a massive achievement worthy of recognition.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Are you able to acknowledge your daily achievements in the same way someone else might? Think about it. If a good friend managed to run errands while battling severe anxiety, you'd be incredibly proud of them. You certainly wouldn't judge them for finding it hard. I think it is time we step outside our own harsh internal judgment. Try to look at your day through the eyes of someone who cares about you unconditionally. Practice that unconditional self-worth every single day, recognizing your own courage in those quiet, mundane moments. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you take this perspective with you into the rest of your day.